So as you all know, we are all in a global pandemic due to the coronavirus. But the question that still has not been answered is, where did it come from in China? We all know it came from China, but we don't know where it originated and stuff like that. So the popular theory to where the coronavirus originated is from the Wuhan seafood market in China. They say that this man went into a Wuhan store and bought a bat and then made a soup out of it and then ate the soup and then contracted coronavirus. That is what they're saying this virus originated from. First off, patient 0 didn't even go to the Wuhan market and buy a bat from that market like they're saying he did. Second of all, they don't even sell bats in that market, so why would they even say that the bats came from that market if they don't even sell them?
No one sells bat at the seafood market too, and the official from CDC didn't mention they find any bats in the seafood market too.
Certainly the Lancet paper showing that supposed patient 0 was nowhere near the market. Secondly, that there are no bats in the seafood market or anywhere close. The idea of the spread so fast through a population, just the way it was said through the seafood market, is highly unlikely and improbable.
Third of all, if it were to come from a bat, bats have a coronavirus of their own. People are saying that that coronavirus transmitted to that human, patient 0, and then he spread it to everyone else, which doesn't make biological sense because there's this thing called spike proteins, which allows a virus to connect to human cells. It's like lock and key, it won't connect if it's not perfect.
The S proteins, the high similarity of the S proteins from SARS-1 to now SARS-2, that's your spike protein. That's the lock and key. That's going to be what drives it right through human cells. And so we know that's the pathogenic spike protein that for the original SARS. So now you're allowing that access to human tissues because the spike proteins of the natural evolutionary strains don't infect human cells at all. So that research has been going on at Wuhan and published since 2007. And clearly, if that spike protein from SARS weren't on the new COVID-19 or SARS-2, it wouldn't be able to enter human cells. So again, this is evidence that it couldn't go through the Wuhan seafood market, because how did you get that spike protein off the original SARS from bats or any other way? It's lab derived.
So for them to say that it came from bats is completely false, because the human cell and the bat corona can't even connect together because they're not the same. COVID-19 happening right now has the perfect spike protein that connects to human cells, which doesn't even make sense because people are saying it comes from the bat when it's impossible for it to come from the bat. It is very similar to the SARS-1 and the SARS-2 spike proteins that happened years ago. So how did the coronavirus even come to be? That is the question we still don't know. The only explanation is that it's man-made, because those two things cannot just magically evolve together to perfectly match the human cell, which it could corrupt. It can't. It's impossible. But there is somewhere corona could have originated. It's the Wuhan Research Virus Lab. This virus experimenting lab is only a couple yards away from where they say corona originated from. They've been testing viruses, and you know what? I think it escaped. It escaped from that lab. According to French virologist Luc Montagnier, who is also the discoverer of the HIV virus and also a co-discoverer of the AIDS virus, he says that for this coronavirus to be naturally occurring is impossible. He says that COVID-19's genome has elements of HIV and malaria, which is not a naturally occurring thing that could just come together. He said it's not possible for that to be naturally occurring. And I don't know about you, but I think he's a pretty solid source of viruses and stuff, because he discovered HIV and co-discovered AIDS. So for him to say that it's man-made, I wouldn't doubt him. He says that presence of elements of HIV and germ of malaria in the genome of coronavirus is highly suspect, and the characteristics of the virus could not have arisen naturally.
Scientists found the Wuhan coronavirus, the current pandemic, is highly similar to a bat SARS-like coronavirus previously discovered by the Nanjing Military Research Institute, showing 100% amino acid similarity in NSP7 and envelope protein, the E protein. What does this high similarity reveal?
Hard to see proteins 100% identical when the virus jumps species. And so that was suggesting maybe the virus could be generated with a reverse engineer process.
I certainly believe that the 100% amino acid similarity says it can't possibly be a natural mutation. It almost certainly is a recombination event that was laboratory driven.
The sequence of a key part of S protein of Wuhan virus has high homology with the SARS virus.
Another interesting fact is, according to director of Jinyuntan Hospital, which specializes in unknown pneumonia cases, Director Huang Chaolin says that the first patient arrived at the hospital December 1st, which is 2 weeks before the larger cluster on December 15th started popping up at the seafood market.
I think this journal article is very important. It reveals a lot of important information. For example, this paper talk about the first patient onset was actually on December 1st. These patients were not related to Huanan seafood market. And also no epidemiological association was found between the first patient and subsequent patient. And then also on this paper, I talk about on December 10th, there were 3 more onset cases, 2 of which were not related to Huanan seafood market wholesale. Major discovery is that a total of 41 patients were counted in this paper, and 14 of them proved to be unrelated to the seafood market, accounting for more than 1/3.
This patient has no relation to that seafood market or the latter cases that had popped up in the middle of December. Once more, because we know that there is an incubation period of 10 to 14 days, roughly 2 weeks, that this patient would have had to have it somewhere around middle to late November. And 2 out of 3 people who were admitted to this hospital had no relation to that seafood market. So it's safe to say that although it might have infected the seafood market, it didn't originate from the seafood market. Once more, they weren't even selling bats at the seafood market. It is a little suspicious that it is a coronavirus mixed with SARS, mixed with HIVs, mixed with malaria. Because if it was just from bats, then as we said, the S proteins could not attach itself to the human cell, so it has to be like modified. It has to be the right S protein for it to even affect human beings. As we said before, it's been studied and stated that it's near impossible for the bat coronavirus to attach itself to a human cell because they don't have the right S proteins to do that. It needs to be a perfect fit. And because all of these things are mixed into this COVID-19, that might explain why our symptoms are so scattered and it's hard to pin down whether you have coronavirus or not sometimes. If coronavirus was man-made, we have to ask ourselves why it was man-made. A lot of people think that it was made for biological warfare, to bring down the enemy using sickness and illness. But obviously, according to the numbers, coronavirus is nearly as deadly as even the flu or normal pneumonia. It still is deadly. And if they had made it with the intent for it to be a biological weapon, they had failed in doing so. And so they have to go to this other tactic where they use fear to control us, use fear to get us to think that coronavirus is more of a threat than it actually is. If we took a more internal perspective on the situation, it can all be traced back to characteristics from the original Fall in the Garden, when Lucifer was giving Eve a bunch of empty threats, saying like, oh, God's keeping stuff from you, you'll never be like God, you'll be less powerful, all these things, to try to get her to do something that is centered on fear, that the fear had pushed her to make that decision. And so we're being feared into staying at home, not going back to work, and thus our economy is slowly crashing. And so we're being feared into our country's economy failing. And like said in previous videos, this is the era of empty threats, where you say something and people out of fear react in an unfavorable way that can cause harm to them or cause harm to the whole.
The Democrats are just unable to accept the fact that they lost. And what can we learn from history, biblical history, about what they're inclined to do? The more angry they are, the more desperate they are, the more they're going to pull from an old familiar bag of tricks created by Satan. So let's look at what they're likely to try to do. They're likely to try, just as Lucifer tried to scare Eve, as if God was, trying to trick her. He was like, no, God didn't tell you everything. He's holding back from you. You'd be like God if you ate the fruit and blah, blah, blah. He made Eve feel something that wasn't real. He made her feel that she needed to act against a threat that wasn't there. Okay? So we know that that's what we're in. We're in a season of empty threats. If Eve had ignored Lucifer, the fall would have never happened, because all he had was empty threats. After she gave him control over human society through the fall, he now had ammunition. So the fact that all they have is empty threats means that Satan is so weakened by the providence of God in these last days that he's got to go back to his first and weakest strategy, which is to just scare responsible people, the children of God, with empty threats. Don't listen to the Democrats. Things are not as bad as what they say. Their only hope is that by believing in this fear-mongering, that we will act to correct things that weren't a problem in the first place. And by paying attention too much to them, acting to counterbalance them and this kind of thing, the business of the country is not being advanced.
The archangel instilled fear into Eve, but it was up to Adam to make that fear a physical reality. And so even though we have all this fear looming up in our head and we're scared to do things, it's up to us to put into action whether or not we're going to reenact this fear in the physical world.